Welcome to Coffee Break. Thoughtful conversations for a busy world. Let's begin.
When you look into a standard bathroom mirror, there is a fundamental expectation of physics.
Right. A one-to-one exchange.
Exactly. You raise your right hand, the reflection raises its left. You smile, it smiles. It's an accurate, immediate representation of the reality standing right in front of it.
And there is something deeply comforting about that predictability, you know?
Oh, absolutely. The glass doesn't have a hidden agenda. It doesn't hold onto a grudge from something you said 3 years ago. And it certainly doesn't filter your image through its own childhood trauma. It just bounces the photons back.
If only human relationships work like that.
Right. But then you step out of your bathroom, you walk out your front door, and you step into the realm of human interaction. And suddenly, it's like someone replaced all the normal mirrors with those warped, distorted funhouse mirrors.
Oh, I love that analogy. It gets so messy.
It really does. You wave, and the reflection glares at you. You offer a genuine compliment, and the reflection looks condescending. You are looking at how other people perceive you, and the image coming back is just fundamentally, bafflingly wrong.
Yeah, and that creates a literal physical itch. When someone misunderstands your intentions, it's one of the most universal, deeply ingrained responses we have. It feels like an injustice that demands immediate rectification.
It really does. Today, we are exploring the exhausting, invisible cost of trying to fix that reflection and the radical freedom of just letting people be wrong about you.
Because the moment you sense that the image someone holds of you in their mind does not align with your internal reality, the brain interprets that gap not just as an annoyance, but as a systemic error that must be debugged.
We spend an enormous, exhausting amount of our cognitive bandwidth trying to renovate this cognitive funhouse, frantically trying to hammer those curved mirrors flat.
Which is basically an impossible task.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand the cost we are paying here, we first have to clearly define exactly what it is we are trying to control. We have to look at the target we are constantly aiming at.
Right, we have to identify the phantom.
Exactly. And the central premise that we are pulling from our source material today, the core focus of our deep dive into the invisible cost of misunderstanding, is this. You are wasting massive amounts of vital energy trying to control a version of you that only exists in someone else's head.
Yeah, and the fundamental disconnect happens because we operate under the assumption of a singular objective self. We act as though there is one true us walking around in the physical world.
Like everyone has the exact same PDF file of who we are.
Exactly. We think if we just explain our motives clearly enough or, articulate our boundaries perfectly enough, everyone we interact with will download that exact same objective version of us into their brains.
But they don't.
No, from a neurological and psychological standpoint, that objective shared version simply does not exist.
The best way to visualize what is actually happening is to imagine that you have hundreds of different action figures of yourself out in the world.
Oh, wow. Action figures.
Yeah, you literally have these little plastic replicas of you, but you don't get to keep them on your own shelf. They're distributed to everyone you have ever interacted with.
So everyone gets their own little version of you.
Right. Your manager has one. Your mother-in-law has one. Your best friend has one. The barista you buy coffee from every Tuesday has one.
That's a lot of action figures.
And all these people have taken their specific you action figure and placed it into their own complex, pre-built mental dioramas.
What's fascinating here is the psychological architecture of those dioramas. When you look at the mechanics of perception, you realize that the you in someone else's head, that action figure, is not actually you at all.
What is it then?
It is a composite sketch. The human brain is essentially a prediction machine operating on a severe energy budget. It doesn't have the metabolic resources to process the infinite complexity of who you actually are every single time you interact.
So it takes shortcuts.
Exactly. It takes a few basic, highly curated observations of you, and then it fills in the massive gaps using its own existing architecture, its own biases, its own historical traumas, insecurities, and rigid expectations of how the world works.
So when my manager looks at me during a performance review, he isn't seeing the actual me.
Not at all.
He's seeing a composite sketch made up of, a fraction of my actual work, heavily layered with the ghost of his previous employee who missed a major deadline, combined with his own imposter syndrome about his leadership skills, plus whatever underlying anxiety he brought into the office that morning.
That is exactly it. You are functioning as the blank canvas onto which their internal state is being projected. We often talk about theory of mind in psychology.
Right, the ability to understand that others have different thoughts.
Yes, our cognitive capacity to attribute mental states and beliefs to others. But where this breaks down in high-friction social situations is our blind assumption of accuracy.
We assume they are seeing us clearly.
But if an individual has a hypervigilant attachment style or a deep-seated fear of abandonment, their brain is wired to scan for threats. Consequently, they are going to view your completely innocent boundary-setting request for a quiet evening alone not as self-care.
They see it as an attack.
They see it as a personal, targeted rejection. Their composite sketch of you in that specific moment is painted entirely with the brush of their own hypervigilance.
Even if I didn't do anything objectively wrong.
Right. You didn't do anything wrong, but the action figure in their mental diorama has just been abruptly reposed as the antagonist.
And we don't own those dioramas. That's the maddening part. We didn't paint the background scenery. We didn't build the little props. We don't control the lighting.
We have zero administrative access.
But what is our default human behavior?
We
spend our entire lives frantically running from diorama to diorama, trying to pose our little action figure perfectly.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
We reach into the manager's diorama and try to twist the action figure's plastic arms to look incredibly competent and endlessly proactive. Then we sprint over to the mother-in-law's diorama and try to pose the figure to look docile, agreeable, and perfectly responsible.
And the brutal reality is the moment we turn our backs, they just snap the action figure right back to wherever they needed it to be to make their own internal narrative make sense.
Which is just so frustrating.
Well, it creates a profound and often destabilizing philosophical split in our identity. We have the actual identity, the core self you experience when you're entirely alone, stripped of external observation.
The real you.
Yes. And then we have this sprawling, chaotic, decentralized network of perceived identities living in the minds of others. The psychological crisis occurs when we conflate the two.
When we mix them up.
Exactly. We begin to genuinely believe that if the action figure in someone else's diorama is posed as a failure or a villain or a fraud, then our actual identity must be intrinsically flawed. We allow the localized bias projection of one individual to overwrite our internal global sense of self.
But if we know logically that the action figure isn't us, why are we so stubbornly, almost pathologically wired to manage these phantom selves?
It's biology.
Why is it so incredibly difficult to just look at a misunderstanding, shrug, and say, well, that's their diorama, not my problem? It feels like we are fighting against an incredibly powerful biological current.
Because we were fighting a biological current. Our nervous systems were not designed for the modern reality of asynchronous communication, hyperconnectivity, and abstract social networks.
We're wired for a much simpler world.
We evolved in small, interdependent, highly cohesive groups where your perceived identity, your localized reputation within that specific group of 50 to 100 people was inextricably linked to your physical survival.
Oh, wow. So people thought you were bad.
If the collective perception shifted against you, if you were misunderstood as a thief, a liability, or a danger, the consequence wasn't just a bruised ego. The consequence was ostracization. And social exile in a prehistoric environment was a guaranteed death sentence.
So our brains adapted to treat social perception as a matter of literal life and death.
Exactly. So when an acquaintance misreads our tone at a dinner party, or a stranger on a digital platform deliberately misinterprets a comment we made, our brain isn't processing that as a minor abstract data error.
It feels like a lion is attacking us.
Yes, that physiological response, the sudden spike in cortisol, the racing heart, the tight chest, the overwhelming frantic urge to send a massive multi-paragraph text message clarifying our exact meaning.
I've definitely done that.
We all have.
Yeah.
That is the body preparing to fight for its life. It is an ancient hardwired threat detection system misfiring in a modern context. It's what we refer to in psychology as a form of allostatic load.
The wear and tear on the body from chronic stress.
Right. When you perceive that you are being misunderstood, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the part of the brain that processes physical pain, actually lights up. Social rejection, or even the threat of social rejection via misunderstanding, is processed through the exact same neural pathways as physical injury.
So we're trying to survive in exile that isn't actually happening.
You are burning massive amounts of metabolic energy, managing a phantom self to protect your actual self, but the threat to your actual self in that moment is almost entirely an illusion.
Let's dig into that metabolic energy drain, because this naturally transitions us into the concept of the invisible cost. The phrase, the invisible cost of caring too much about being misunderstood, is doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
It really is the core of the issue.
But I want to push back on this philosophy for a moment. Let's ground this in reality. If I just completely drop the rope and adopt a philosophy of I don't care what anyone thinks of my action figure, I'm going to run into severe real-world consequences.
Sure, absolutely.
If I let my boss be wrong about my work ethic, I get fired. If I let my partner be wrong about my commitment, the relationship ends. So where is the actual line here?
That's a very fair point.
How do we reconcile the necessity of strategic reputation management with this idea that we shouldn't be the exhausted 247 PR managers for our own phantom selves?
That distinction is the crux of the entire issue. Dropping the rope does not mean abandoning all social grace, nor does it mean ignoring the practical realities of moving through systems of power, like a corporate hierarchy.
Okay, so it's not just anarchy.
No. The line is drawn between internal values, alignment, and external perception control. It is the difference between utility and emotional enmeshment.
Break that down for me. Utility versus emotional enmeshment.
Strategic reputation management utility is recognizing that certain environments require specific behaviors to achieve an outcome. You show up on time, you communicate clearly, you deliver the project, because that is the transactional requirement of the environment.
You are managing the outcome.
Right. The PR manager role, the emotional enmeshment, happens when your focus shifts from did I do the work with integrity to did they perceive my intrinsic worth and validate my goodness while I was doing the work.
Oh, that is a massive paradigm shift. It's the difference between doing the right thing and needing the audience to stand up, applaud, and submit a written review, confirming that they fully understood the purity of your soul while you did the right thing.
Precisely. You can clarify a missed deadline with your boss, that is utility. But if your boss still thinks you are lazy after you provide the context, and you spend the next 4 days agonizing over their internal subjective judgment of your character, you have crossed into emotional enmeshment.
That's where the cost comes in.
That is where the invisible cost is extracted. It's invisible because you don't get a monthly bank statement detailing how much cognitive bandwidth you surrendered to a phantom.
I wish we did. It might wake us up.
The cost is paid in ego depletion. Every time you actively suppress your authentic reaction to perfectly curate a response for someone else's diorama, you are depleting the glucose in your prefrontal cortex. This diminishes your executive function, your creativity, and your emotional regulation for the rest of the day.
Let's map this invisible cost onto an incredibly specific, granular scenario that I know everyone listening to this deep dive has experienced. Think about the agonizing email draft or the agonizing Slack message.
Oh no, we've all been there.
You sit down to write a message to a colleague. It's not even a high-stakes conflict. It's just something that requires a tiny bit of nuance, maybe asking for an update on a delayed project.
The initiation of the self-editing spiral.
Exactly. You open the window and type the first word, hi. And immediately, the internal PR manager steps in. Is hi too abrupt? Does hi sound cold? I usually say, hey.
The overthinking begins.
If I switch to hi, are they going to read into that? Are they going to think I'm establishing a formal boundary because I'm secretly furious? Okay, backspace. Hey, wait, the exclamation point. Is that overcompensating?
Right. Does it seem like I'm shouting cheerfully with a forced manic energy?
Yes. Let me change it to a comma. Hey.
And you haven't even approached the actual substance of the communication yet.
Right.
You are merely trying to disarm their potential defense mechanisms before they even exist.
So you move to the sentence. Just wanted to see if you had an update. You stare at the word update. Does update imply they are failing? Does it sound like I'm micromanaging?
Just curious how things are going.
Is curious passive-aggressive? Does curious sound like a trap? You sit there, your breathing is shallow, your jaw is tight, and you spend 25 minutes drafting 3 sentences.
It's physical labor at that point.
You read it out loud to yourself to test the cadence. You mentally simulate all 14 possible reactions the recipient might have based on their historical communication style. You might even turn to someone else in the room and say, read this. What is the tone of this? Is there any possible way this can be misconstrued?
Trying to foolproof the language.
You are attempting to mathematically calibrate the English language so that it cannot possibly be misunderstood. And then finally, with a spike of adrenaline, you hit send.
Notice the physiological state you just described. Shallow breathing, muscle tension, adrenaline. That is a threat response. And what is the immediate aftermath of hitting send?
The hypervigilant waiting game. You watch the digital indicators, you see the little typing bubbles appear and then disappear.
The absolute worst.
You start spiraling again. They started typing and then stopped. They are formulating an angry response. They took it the wrong way. And if they eventually reply with a simple, unpunctuated, got it, you completely unravel.
Just got it. No exclamation point. No thanks. They hate me.
Exactly. I have ruined the working relationship. We just spent 30 minutes of sheer, agonizing emotional labor over a routine daily interaction.
The tragedy of that scenario is the complete illusion of control. You expended a massive amount of cognitive energy trying to hack into their mental diorama to pose your action figure as friendly but professional.
But I don't have the admin rights.
You don't have the admin rights to their brain. That colleague might read your perfectly manicured 25-minute email while they are rushing through a crowded train station, distracted by a personal text from their spouse, dealing with a low-grade migraine.
They aren't even thinking about my tone.
They glance at your message, process the basic request, and fire back, got it, without a single thought about your tone, your intentions, or your character. All of that anticipatory labor, all of that agonizing calibration was entirely wasted. It protected you from a threat that didn't exist.
Think about your own mental bandwidth this past week. Just review the last 7 days of your life. How much of your vital, finite, irreplaceable life energy did you spend trying to manage how you were perceived?
It's probably a shocking amount.
How many times did you replay a conversation in your head, analyzing a slight change in someone's facial expression? How many texts did you write, delete, and rewrite? How much of your day was consumed by managing the thoughts of someone who, objectively speaking, probably wasn't even thinking about you at all?
There is a deep irony in this invisible cost. We spend countless hours managing our phantom selves in the minds of others, operating under the assumption that we are the central focus of their narrative.
But we aren't.
But the reality of human nature is that they are doing the exact same thing. They are entirely consumed with managing their phantom selves in our minds. We are essentially functioning as a network of avatars, constantly adjusting our masks, terrified of being perceived inaccurately by people who are too busy adjusting their own masks to notice.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when you truly internalize this massive invisible cost, you have to confront the trap of it all.
Yes, the trap.
You realize that trying to perfectly correct every single misunderstanding out there is not just exhausting, it is structurally impossible. It is a task that has no endpoint. You are endlessly pushing a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down the moment you look away, because the terrain itself, other people's minds, is constantly shifting.
This raises an important question. If the task is impossible and the cost is so painfully high, why are we so deeply attached to the labor? Why do we refuse to let go?
Right. Why do we care so much?
The root pathology of caring too much emerges when we unconsciously stitch our inherent self-worth to the accurate comprehension of an external observer. We draft a subconscious conditional contract with reality.
What does that contract say?
It says, my identity is only valid, I am only inherently good, and I am only worthy of existing without anxiety if this specific external entity correctly perceives me as good, valid, and worthy.
You are taking the master key to your own psychological stability, and you are handing it over to an incredibly unreliable narrator. You are letting someone who doesn't even know how to process their own emotions dictate the reality of yours.
Exactly the dynamic at play. When you inextricably link your identity to their comprehension, a misunderstanding ceases to be a mere communication error or a difference in perspective. It instantly escalates into an existential threat.
It feels like an attack on who you are.
If they misunderstand your motive, it feels as though they are actively erasing your reality. You feel compelled to defend yourself, not just to clarify the record, but to preserve your actual sense of self.
And what is so vital to understand here is that someone misunderstanding you is almost always a reflection of their limits, not your flaws.
That is a crucial point.
If you set a boundary, let's say you tell a friend you can't attend an event because you were burned out, and they misinterpret your boundary as a selfish personal attack against them. That is not a flaw in your communication. You did not fail at explaining.
No, you didn't.
That misunderstanding is a hard limit in their emotional maturity. Their diorama simply does not have the architectural capacity to process someone else's autonomy without viewing it as a threat.
Taking that a step further into the psychology of perception, we have to look at the powerful mechanism of motivated reasoning. We tend to assume that misunderstandings are accidental, that if we just provide the correct data, the other person will update their mental software and see us clearly.
Like it's just a glitch.
But very often, people are actively, albeit subconsciously, motivated to misunderstand you because it serves a crucial function for their ego, or it upholds the structural integrity of their worldview.
What does that look like mechanically? Why would someone need to be wrong about me?
Imagine an individual whose fundamental worldview, perhaps forged through past trauma or systemic disappointment, is that human beings are inherently transactional, selfish, and untrustworthy. Their entire mental model of reality relies on this cynicism to protect them from being hurt.
Okay, so they need the world to be bad to feel safe.
Now, imagine you enter their life and perform an act of genuine, unprompted altruism. You help them without expecting anything in return. This does not make them happy. This creates massive cognitive dissonance. Your actual behavior is actively threatening the foundational architecture of their worldview.
Because if I am genuinely good, then their theory of a totally selfish world is wrong. And if their theory is wrong, their shield is gone, and they have to reevaluate their entire reality.
Precisely. It is infinitely easier and metabolically cheaper for their brain to deploy confirmation bias to resolve that dissonance. Instead of dismantling their entire philosophy of human nature, they simply misunderstand your motive.
They decide I'm up to something.
They assume you have a hidden agenda. They convince themselves you're manipulating them. Their misunderstanding of you is not an accident. It is a load-bearing pillar for their ego. It is structural. If they accurately perceive your genuine goodness, their cynic identity collapses. Therefore, they need you to be the antagonist so their universe continues to make sense.
That realization is profoundly liberating. But I also have to admit, it is terrifying. It is genuinely frightening to realize that you cannot logic someone out of a perception they didn't logic themselves into.
It goes against everything we want to believe about communication.
You can bring receipts, you can present a beautifully organized chronological timeline of events, you can utilize every I feel statement you learned in therapy, you can remain perfectly calm and emotionally regulated. And they can still look you dead in the eye and confidently walk away believing that you are the villain of the story.
What you are describing is the profound grief of relinquishing the illusion of control. We desperately cling to the belief that if we just find the precise algorithmic combination of vocabulary words, we can unlock the correct perception in someone else's mind.
We just want the right password.
Recognizing that you do not have that password, that you have never had that power, triggers a grieving process. You are mourning the loss of your ability to dictate external reality.
But once you process that grief, once you step through the terror of losing control over the funhouse mirrors, what actually waits on the other side? We are moving from diagnosing the trap to handing over the keys to get out of it. And that is the ultimate focus of our deep dive today.
The freedom of letting people be wrong about you.
The profound, radical, paradigm-shifting freedom of it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how you actually live your life, the practical application of this freedom is often described in psychological circles as dropping the rope.
Dropping the rope.
When you are caught in the desperate cycle of trying to force someone to understand you, you are essentially engaged in a brutal, endless game of psychological tug-of-war. You are gripping this abrasive rope. Your hands are raw, your heels are dug deep into the mud, and your entire nervous system is screaming with effort.
And the other person is pulling back.
The other person is pulling just as hard on their end, anchored by their own biases and motivated reasoning. The harder you pull to drag them into your reality, the harder they pull to drag you into theirs. The tension is immense, and the argument endlessly escalates.
And dropping the rope doesn't mean you win the argument. It means you recognize the game itself is rigged. You just open your hands.
You open your hands. The moment you release your grip, the tension vanishes instantly. Yeah. You stop trying to code their brain. You realize you don't have the admin rights to their mental diorama, and you simply stop typing.
The argument just ends.
The other person might fall backward from the sudden lack of resistance. They might stand there aggressively holding a useless piece of rope. They might loudly declare to anyone who will listen that they won the tug of war. But it ceases to impact you because you are no longer participating in the dynamic. You have made the conscious, powerful decision that their incorrect, distorted opinion of you is simply none of your business.
So what does this all mean for the reality of your day-to-day life? It means a complete re-architecting of your cognitive bandwidth. It means reclaiming the stolen energy you've been bleeding out into the ether.
It's life-changing.
It means you can actually witness a misunderstanding around her. You can see it sitting right there in front of you, like a messy, sticky spill on the floor. And instead of immediately dropping to your knees and frantically scrubbing at it to clean it up and make it perfect, you can just look at it and say, huh, they spilled something. And you just walk out of the room. You let the misunderstanding sit there entirely uncorrected.
The neurological shift that happens when you do this is profound. By intentionally letting a misunderstanding exist without intervening, you are training your amygdala that external misperception is not a biological threat. You discover, experientially, that you will survive.
The sky doesn't fall.
The sky does not fall. The world does not end because an acquaintance at a dinner party fundamentally misread your personality, or because a former colleague has painted you as the antagonist in the narrative of their own career failure. Your intrinsic value, your actual identity, remains completely, solidly untouched.
Think about what this quiet power actually looks like in practice. Let's say you are in a debate, maybe a tense discussion with someone in your social circle. The friction is high, and they suddenly say something that completely, wildly mischaracterizes your core values. They say, well, you clearly just don't care about anyone's feelings but your own.
That's a huge trigger.
Now, the old version of you, the exhausted PR manager, would immediately take the bait. The heart rate would spike to 120. You would launch into a passionate 10-minute defensive monologue. You would start listing chronological examples of your empathy, demanding they acknowledge your truth, fighting desperately to pose the action figure correctly.
Which, ironically, would only feed their confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Your frantic defensiveness would be categorized in their mind as further proof of your self-centeredness.
Exactly. The harder you fight, the more you prove their warped point. But the new version of you, the version who has embraced the radical freedom of letting people be wrong, you hear them say, you clearly don't care about anyone's feelings. You feel the initial somatic sting because you are human, and the brain still registers the social friction.
It's okay to feel it.
But instead of reacting, you visualize opening your hands and dropping the rope. You look at them. You don't offer a rebuttal. You don't try to hack into their diorama. You might just say, I'm sorry you see it that way, or even just a simple, calm, okay, and you disengage. You walk away.
You don't need the last word.
You don't get the triumphant cinematic mic drop moment where they suddenly burst into tears and realize how profoundly wrong they were. You allow them to walk away holding their deeply flawed, completely fabricated perception of who you are. And then you go on to have a genuinely great day anyway. You go get a coffee. You focus deeply on a project you love. You laugh with someone who actually sees your actual self.
What you have achieved in that moment is the epitome of emotional sovereignty. You have constructed an impenetrable fortress around your peace of mind. You have transitioned your identity from being fragile and reliant on external consensus to being fundamentally anti-fragile.
That's a great word for it, anti-fragile.
You have declared through your actions that your internal reality is so secure and so entirely self-validated that it does not require the applause, the understanding, or the agreement of an audience to exist. That is an incredibly grounded, deeply powerful way to move through a chaotic world.
When you really process this, the amount of time you get back is staggering. It's like discovering a hidden bank account of hours, days, and weeks of mental time that you previously spent paying the invisible cost.
Because the massive amount of metabolic energy you previously surrendered to anticipating reactions, agonizing overtone, and conducting exhaustive post-mortem analyses of every social interaction can finally be redirected. You transition from performing the perception of your life to actually inhabiting the reality of it.
As we start to wrap up this incredibly deep journey today, let's briefly trace the path we've walked. We started by looking into the cognitive funhouse mirror, identifying the phantom selves, and finally, we arrived at the summit. The quiet, immense, paradigm-shifting power dropping the rope. The profound freedom of letting people be wonderfully, entirely, confidently wrong about you, and realizing that your actual identity will survive the experience completely unscathed.
As you carry these concepts forward, the most vital realization to anchor yourself to is that you are the sole, uncontested author of your internal reality. The distorted, fragmented perceptions of the crowd do not write your truth. They never have.
Never.
The immense cognitive bandwidth you save by refusing to manage those external action figures is energy that rightfully belongs to you. Invest it in your actual physical lived experience. Invest it in cultivating relationships with individuals who have the emotional capacity to see you clearly without requiring you to constantly perform or endlessly explain your right to exist.
You are the author. Now, as you step back out into the world today, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to explore. We've talked extensively about the freedom of letting go of control. But let's push that one step further into the unknown. Think about this. What if the most authentic, brilliant, unapologetically powerful version of you can only emerge after you have completely abandoned the exhausting campaign to be understood by everyone else? Who do you actually become when you finally stop performing for an audience that isn't really watching? Take your energy back, drop the rope, let them be wrong. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Coffee Break. If this conversation stayed with you, you can find more episodes here on the channel. Until next time, take care.